question for you. So, I keep reading about, the office to residential conversion. And it's funny that the very few that we've looked at here at Design that developers have brought to us, to me, has nothing to do with affordable housing.
No.
The ones that I looked at are in incredibly beautiful neighborhoods in Midtown Manhattan or, Upper East Side, where there was some old office buildings, and they want to convert them to, very expensive, beautiful loft buildings, or loft type.
I feel attacked.
No.
No, we're doing that.
Well,
We're one of those
and-
people,
and-
yes.
And I can't. I'm not blaming the developer.
Right.
I'm all for it. If you have a vacant office building that's going to sit there and be an eyesore and people can live in it, we should every square footage of building should be utilized for a purpose in my mind. That's what we want to promote here.
And there's
in New York.
90 million square feet of unoccupied
Right.
offices in New York City today. 90 million square feet.
Correct.
That's like
So-
hundreds and hundreds of football fields of unoccupied office space right now.
And we all see it because every time I go visit a client, I walk in the lobby and there's a big sign that says space available, right? And then I leave there and I walk around the corner and I see commercial space on the first floor available everywhere.
Retail all over the city.
It's all over the place. So, one of the things that when I look at this and I read about it, it seems like there's this idea that these office buildings are going to get converted to affordable housing. Do you see incentives in there that will promote that?
No, without 421A, again, there's no tax abatement to create affordable housing. So there's no way you can convert an empty hotel or an empty office building into affordable housing and make it work.
So besides the 421A program, there's no other programs that would incentivize.
That's correct. There's no other program
See
that can
that,
incentivize it.
To me, that so again, where as a developer, as an entrepreneur, how do you do that where you can help give back affordable housing if there's no incentives, if you got to foot the whole bill? How does that work?
So, office buildings are a particular challenge, right? Many of them, most of them, are built on a density that is illegal for residential housing.
Correct.
Because the maximum residential density in New York City is a 10 FAR 12 with affordable housing. And the maximum commercial density is 15 and can be even higher.
Correct.
Right? And so if you were to take an office building, and then try to convert it to residential, typically the dimensions are not correct.
Correct.
Right? Because
And
office
you don't
buildings
have
are built.
enough light and air.
That's right. Office buildings are built deeper.
Right.
And when we build residential buildings, they're typically not more than 70 to 75 feet wide.
Right.
So you have two 30-foot deep apartments and a
hallway.
hallway between them.
Right.
But office buildings are often built 100 feet deep. There's a lot of 100 by 100 office buildings in New York City, and they're too deep. They don't have the right elevators, right? And they don't have the right lobby, and they're oversized, right? So you'd end up having to shave off large sections of the building.
And
to make them work, and which means you're not saving any money, right? So it's going to cost you the same amount to renovate an office building into roughly the same amount, renovate an office building into residential as it would to build it from the ground up.
Correct.
And so the same economics are at place. If you want affordable housing in these office buildings, then you need to change the law and make an incentive to do it.
So, Lou, back in the day, when I first started, there was a section in the multiple dwelling law that was a really incredible piece. And our office became, I wouldn't say experts, but we were a really good, solid firm. That firms came to us and said, look, I got a commercial building. There was Article 7B. We were able to take and do what they called a loft conversion, but really in reality was a commercial building to an apartment. And those laws were written a long time ago. And when this whole concept of converting offices to residential, the first thing that hit my mind was I read those sections of the multiple dwelling law over and over, and how they gave us concessions, right? Yes. That you could use a lot line window as long as it had a sprinkler. We could use a stair again. If you put concrete, if you put a Q deck over this, you can get an extra rating. If you rated the side walls, they gave you options to promote it.
Yes.
So now you're looking at this huge office building, and I once asked the developer this recently. I said, so we have a big square tower that goes straight up for 30 floors. How are we going to get light in there without drilling a core right down the middle to make an inner court?
Right.
And when you start to think of it that way, then you say to yourself, well, how are they going to demo it? They got to demo it down the building and out. The cost is astronomical.
Correct.
It's and then once you open it up, when was it built? How much asbestos is in it? How much lead is in it? What's here? What's there? It sounds like this great concept of reusing the frame. But in reality, when you go to apply the 2022 code,
Right.
it's going to cost you 3 times as much.
We looking at a property right now, which we're looking to acquire, an empty office building for a business that went out of business, had an owner occupied office building that closed their business, and we think we're saving roughly $50 a foot between building ground up. If we started over and built from the ground up, as opposed to renovating the building that's there.
But you're assuming that without any hidden surprises.
Correct, exactly right.
Once you open it
That's
up, and
correct.
then now all of a sudden one little thing goes wrong, and that $50 a square foot gets cut down to $40 a square foot.
And but you see, it's there's from a developer perspective, it's almost worth it, because when we're building ground up, right, our greatest risks are in the soil,
Correct.
right? When we're in the soil, we may move the building next door. When we built 111 Varick, we had a building built in 1870 on one side.
You had
we
the
had
tunnel.
the New York City subway on the other side,
And a
we had
sign.
the Holland Tunnel on a third side. We literally had to put the facade of the building up from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m.
No, but it was incredible.
A
Incredible.
lot of
project.
work, right? So and we went down 100 feet to bedrock to put that building. Literally drove 60 caissons into bedrock to hold the building up, and 30 to hold the building down in the case of an earthquake or hurricane. And
So 50% of it was to keep it from falling
over, right? So and we're in the ground. So when we're doing renovations, we're not in the ground.
Right.
And when you're out of the ground, it's manpower, material, and money, right?
Correct.
You're in control of your destiny when you're out of the ground. With a renovation project, every time you open a wall, you can find something different.
Right.
We did a renovation in Jersey City. The developer had drop ceilings in the corridor. You remove the drop ceiling, there's no fireproofing between the corridor and the apartment. Literally, every time you look someplace,
You find
you
another
never know
problem.
what you're going to find, and your costs can go through the roof that way. And that's the situation when you're doing renovation. So while you don't have the risk of being in the ground, you have the risk of unknowns, and maybe it balances out in the end. We hope so. This is our first office to resi conversion, and it's an experiment. It's only a 70,000 square foot building.
That's a nice sized building.
Not bad for a start, right? But
Right.
it's really this exercise to get our crews trained, our feet wet, our mindset, getting a team together to be able to do this,
Well, and-
because there's more coming.
30 years ago, Article 7B of office to residential conversion or commercial to residential buildings. So I know that's a hot topic. You and I have talked about it. So what's your forecast? What do you think? I mean, I ask you because we've had developers in, we've had insurance people in, we had Mike Minotti in on one of the podcasts to talk about site safety, about doing this conversion. We spoke to Stephen from Lapolis for him to give us his take about what it takes to gut an office building and make apartments. So, I'd like to get your side of, what do you think the biggest challenges, in the code side that you think are going to influence what these buildings are going to look like?
Yeah, I think, the hardest part is, obviously, and there's people who are more experienced than me, is, you can throw a lot of money at an office to residential conversion, but it still has to comply with code.
Of course.
Hands down, it has to comply with code and zoning. And I think the challenge in office buildings, which is I think what a lot of people are talking about, is the floor plates.
Right.
The floor plates are huge,
Right.
and they're not, offices don't have natural light and air requirements. Residential clearly does. So, you can't, there's, 30-foot room depth requirements. So if an office, floor
100
plate,
by 100 buildings.
right, if an office floor plate is, even bigger than 100 by 100
Right.
in certainly many cases, okay, so you
How do we make the core?
how do we make the core? And sometimes it's like, wow, this core is, huge because we can only get legal light and air, to the perimeter for so much. And then, okay, well, can we fill the core with amenity spaces?
Right.
But on every floor, is there enough that we can provide that's going to be, attractive for people who want to live there and
right now
makes sense.
We've started one. We've done many over the
Yeah.
years. We've done a lot. We've done a lot when they weren't, on the cover of every magazine or every, LinkedIn article. I've done many in my career here in Williamsburg, and Sergio had done many in Manhattan that we would call a loft conversion. And so it's not a loft conversion, but it falls under the same section of the multiple dwelling law. And one of the feedbacks that I keep getting on it is that the law, when Richard Lobel was in, he talked about that the multiple dwelling law needs to be updated because it needs to be revised around this current climate and these current ideas and this progression of where New York City is at today versus where it was in the 1960s when they wrote that section. And just to reiterate from the past podcast is the multiple dwelling law is a state law. It's not a city law. So it's not the city can't just arbitrarily decide, to put something in front of city council and try to change a law. This has to go through the state. So it's going to take time. But so far, you've been doing some research on this project that we have in Midtown. Yep. So tell me what, give us some questions that they're asking us, like right off the bat that you're like, oh, well, that's interesting. That's a question I didn't really think about. So, we're in our first one, they closed on the building and now they're starting their design process.
Yeah. I think for most people with older buildings in New York City is what code do I use?
Right.
Zoning is zoning is zoning. But in New York City, we don't have an existing buildings code.
Correct.
Which, does exist in many other jurisdictions, but not here, not yet.
Not yet. It's on its
not
way.
Not yet. It's coming.
It's coming.
Is what code do I use?
Right.
And the answer is you always have to start in the current code, which for us now is the 2022 construction codes of New York City. It went into effect back in November.
Shout out to Lauren, a huge building. And they know they're going to basically gut the whole building. They're going to leave the stair.
Yep.
They're going to take everything else out of it. They're going to leave the elevators. They're going to hope that the elevators can comply with some sort of code that would allow them. If not, they're going to probably take those out too. So now we're basically left with maybe a facade, maybe. Because when we want to do light and air, we may have to cut the building back, right?
Yeah.
So let's use that scenario. We have a facade, we have a core, and there's nothing else in the whole building. Does that allow us to stay in the 2022 code, or we have the option to go to the prior codes?
You have the option to go to the prior codes. And what's interesting within the list of 20 exceptions, which always have to comply with 2022, even within those things, there's specific items for prior code buildings. So take your elevators as an example. Elevators always have to follow the current code.
Correct.
But within there is provisions for prior code buildings. So like in this example, you mentioned like, oh, if they keep the elevators. If you keep the elevator shaft, there's specific allowances that are more generous for a prior code building with the existing elevator shaft enclosure.
So
there's a lot of things to look at.
Right. So perfect example is, I keep hearing about the new size of the elevators for residential because of the stretchers, and so those are going to be the challenges. Where again, you made a valid point at the very beginning. Well, it says here I can use it, and then Lauren, because you have all this great experience and you do this day to day, Lauren brings the added value to the client and says, yeah, that is correct. But there is this provision that at least one elevator needs to be this size so that they can put a stretcher in it. Right. So that's where this whole office to residential conversion gets very sticky because one section says one thing, another section says something else, and now you're on the balancing act of, well, do I fight this that says that? But I know that the fire department and EMS needs that. So this is going to govern over that. So a lot of those choices, I think, is what we're going to be learning
Yes.
over the next several years. Lou Madigan said it best. If you're going to throw yourself into the office to residential market, the only way to do it is to dive in.
Yeah.